In this video, we're going to talk about materials in 3ds Studio Max. Now, in the previous lesson, we talked about lights and how you can create the different types of lights in 3ds Max and in using Arnold renderer, which is the default renderer at the moment in 3ds Max. And we also created what is called a mesh light, which is a light that is gonna take the shape of an object. So whatever object we're gonna select, that's gonna become an actual light. So we talk about all the different effects that we can have with lights, and also we saw how we can apply the IES file, which is kind of a particular effect to have a more realistic spotlight, and also how we can create a light projecting an image, which is similar to what we do with materials. With materials, we use textures, which are basically images inside the material, to lay out the material on a surface. So it's like basically projecting something on a surface, essentially, but it's not like a light, it's something similar. So we saw the different effects here, also how to create some interesting like black and white movies, noir movies like Venetian blinds, and you can project using you can see here different type of lights. We talked about the 3-point lighting system, how we can improve the three-dimensionality of the scene and using the key light, the fill light, and the backlight, which you are seeing right now. We also saw that we can change the resolution of the interactive rendering so that we can switch from a less quality and faster rendering or a higher quality preview, but it's going to be slower. So I'm going to use the faster. So it's going to have more performance and less quality, because in this case we can be quicker. But if you have a strong computer, you can definitely use the higher resolution settings. So talking about the mesh light that we were talking before, we can see the effect of the light by the reflections on the floor. So we are actually emitting light from a really low intensity light from this mesh, but the object itself is not an emissive object. So what we can do here is create an emissive material. The emissive material is one of the easiest to create. So you see here I opened up the Slate material editor. We can have the different scene materials right here. We can get it from here. So whatever we create, we can find it here. Whatever we import as object with textures, we can find the texture right here and the material right here. So it's a really handy tool to manage the material. Now you have two ways you can manage materials. You have the Slate material editor, which is this one right here, and it's a little bit more advanced for like advanced user because it has a lot of nodes and complex structure. We're gonna see that later on. And then we have the compact material editor, which is more compact basically. So it's also more user friendly in my opinion, and it was like the old fashioned material editor of 3ds Max. So I'm gonna use both. So for old users, they're gonna start from here. New user can see this one here and also the new Slate material. Now you can go here and restore anytime this panel, and you can just click and drag there and you will see the material applied onto your object. So it's just a click and drag. It's the fastest way we can apply a material. And now this material is nothing fancy. It's a physical material. 3ds Max uses PBR, which are physically based render materials, and uses all the parameters that we can find in PBR materials. And we're gonna go through all these basic parameters in this first video. Then we're gonna move on and talk about the textures and the more complex parameters. But essentially, in the basic section here, you have the basic effects of a material, which are like transparency, reflections, and you can see here also emission. So if I use the white instead of the black, we can already see that our object now is actually like a lamp. It's not a dark object, but it's a really bright object emitting white light. So this is the way we can create emissive materials, which also contribute to global illumination. Now, we talked about global illumination, direct lighting, and indirect lighting. Now, materials are also reacting to light. So light is really important when we need to study materials. And of course, to create a nice scene, you need to consider materials, lights, and the render settings. Now you can see here, I changed the color. You can set up the luminance in the emission channel so you can create an emissive material. Now, talking about PBR materials, physically based render materials, they behave again like real materials in real life, which actually react to light in some sort of way. So if you can see here that the most important thing is reflection or specularity, because every material in reality, one way or the other, just reflect light or makes the light bounce around. And depending on how it bounces on a surface, and again, this is also related to direct and indirect illumination, is gonna react in one way or another. So you can see the specular, so a more glossy material is gonna have like one direction reflection. The diffuse effect is gonna be like a scattered effect on the surface. Also, the roughness, it's another term to define this behavior. So when the light hits the surface and it's gonna be like not reflected in one direction, but in many different directions, you're gonna have like a rough surface effect or a diffuse effect. When it's more concentrated, you're gonna have more glossiness. Now, also, these are two terms that you need to keep in mind: roughness and glossiness, which are basically one the opposite of the other. In terms of textures, we're gonna see later on that a glossiness texture is basically the inverse of a roughness texture. So these are the basic channels, the basic parameters that we need to consider when creating a material. We need to know if it's glossy or if it's not, or if it is something in between. So you can have like all shades of gray in this case, because we're always talking about black and white values, which represent 0 and 1. Now, when the light passes through the surface, it's gonna have a subsurface scattering or transparency or refraction. These are all similar terms, and they show the light how it's gonna behave after it goes underneath the surface. So whether it's gonna go all the way through, and so you can create a really transparent material, or it's gonna stay a little bit inside the material. That's gonna be subsurface scattering. So it's gonna be scattered underneath the surface inside the material, like skin or wax or materials like that. So when it goes through all the way, you're gonna have glasses, or water or liquids or anything that is not opaque, but is gonna be transparent or translucent. And by changing the IOR, it's a value that is gonna define the index of refraction, which means how much that effect is gonna be shown, the refraction, which is kind of a distortion of the light passing through an object. Distortion of the light and of whatever is on the back of that object. Now, I created here a really simple scene. It's a photographic studio again, set up so I have a floor, a back wall there, and some lights. Again, to test the materials, you need to have lights. So you can click and drag and apply again the material. It's going to be a standard gray or light gray effect. It's also going to have some sort of glossiness already, so we can see it's going to be reflecting the light a little bit. Now everything it's in there, everything it's on these basic parameters that we are now going to see one by one and try to create different materials like metals, plastic, glasses, and you can see there the base color, that's the color there, which is a gray, and the roughness right now is at 1, so it's really high. So if I see here, you can also see in the reflection the roughness is pretty high. So if I set that to 1, it's gonna be total rough surface, so I'm not gonna see any specular effect. If I go the other way and I say glossiness, so it's gonna be the opposite. Is 1, it means it's gonna be